my name is Teresita Blanco, the Artsy sister, and we're reading Saturnastra Chalon. This is chapter 9. If it was, he would have known that the strange-looking structure was a temple and not a mansion, and for starters, the structure did not have any idols or altars or anything that would mark it as a temple for the uninitiated. And Chalon's ruminations were interrupted when he saw a person approaching him and Lady Jean at a high pace. And based on his intentions, the person was going to bum rob Lady Jean. You know, like that scene when like a thief just bumps into you and then he robs you. Before he could, Chalon made one of the tiles in the pavement rise slightly and discussed the would-be thief to lose his balance and give a couple of steps to keep himself from falling. And Lady Jean and Chalon moved out of the way and they continued with their walk. And the thief looked behind at his target and then to the floor tile, and he raised an eyebrow when he saw the tile sink back down on the floor again. And Lady Jean commented, "Are there usually this many muggers?" "It has something to do with the weather," wrote Chalon down. "What does the weather have to do with anything?" asked Lady Jean, incredulous. "The weather affects people's moods," wrote Chalon. "How so?" asked Lady Jean. "Think about it. How does seeing a rainbow make you feel?" wrote Chalon. "Happy," said Lady Jean, indulging Chalon. "Just as rainbow inspires positive emotions, certain weather types inspire negative emotions," wrote Chalon. And he read this message after Lady Jean read it, and afterwards he added, "Like for example, when it rains, people tend to feel sad and lonely. And as for cloudy and windy, it makes people feel agitated and worried about their future. And so thieves are more likely to work on cloudy, windy days." "If you say so," said Lady Jean. "I personally prefer windy days because it is easier to fall asleep and all I need is to open a window and the breeze cools my room quite a bit." "I was also making a generalization. There are exceptions to all rules," wrote Chalon. And by now the pair had crossed the road and were on the second block, and only a couple of more blocks and they would be by the gate. And while they had spoken, the pair had noticed a different fellow trailing behind them, and Lady Jean had done her best to ignore the man, and Chalon indeed was pretending that the fellow was not there, and he did not sense any negative emotion, as such there was no cause for alarm, and Lady Jean was silent for a bit when he saw the man drawing closer, and she breathed in a sigh of relief when the man turned a corner. "Chalon, what is your favorite type of weather?" asked Lady Jean to continue the pointless weather conversation. "I like foggy weather. It gives a nice romantic, intimate feel to everything," wrote Chalon. "I find fog rather dreary, and the water droplets cling to everything, and the fog may even make inanimate objects cry," said Lady Jean thoughtfully. And Chalon, following her frame of mind, saw that what she had just remembered, and when Lady Jean was small, there was a fountain of a little girl in the gardens, and whenever it was foggy, the condensation made it seem that the little girl's statue was crying. And it was many years later that she learned who was buried beneath the statue. And Lady Jean frowned when she noticed eyes taking that restful, thoughtful position, and she pinched his arm, and then she added, "This little habit of yours is annoying, and can a person not be allowed to have their own private meditations?" Like she noticed that he was reading her mind. It's like, so then she pinched him, to break his concentration. Chalon shook his head in response, and he reached his board to ask something, but Lady Jean rose her hand, and then she said, "I am done conversing with you for the moment, and as to why, you should know by now." Chalon sighed, and he started preoccupying himself with his surroundings, and by now almost everyone in camp was onto Chalon's ability. And aside from being somewhat bothersome, most people did not make a big deal about it. It was treated like any other magical ability, and the reality is that magic people are different than telepaths, and marines could be magic users, but magic users did not have the innate ability to read minds. And this ability had more to do with the physicality of the brain than the mana, and how it worked varied from person to person. And as for Chalon, he picked up on the electrical currents generated within the brain, and he would then play it back to get a view of what the person was thinking. And the process could be done in real time, with a lag of only a couple of milliseconds. And the clouds moved over the sky somewhat lazily, but the wind felt a tad cold, and the gusts ranged from 5 to 10 miles per hour. And Chalon saw another one of those carriages pass by, and more guards were making their way to the temple. And with such high numbers, there was a good odds that a fellow might get caught. And they had a vital clue after all, and they would capture any fellow trying to buy items with counterfeit coins. And the thief was probably Jean, seeing as though he could not tell real coins from fake ones. Lady Jean poured, broke the silence and asked, "What normally happens to thieves here?" "They get sent to the mines," wrote Chalon, "and if they are younger than 8, they get sent to a prison orphanage." "That's a bit young, don't you think?" commented Lady Jean. Imperia la Divina started ruling when she was 8. Chalon erased it after Lady Jean read it, and then he added, "So she believes that 8-year-olds are old enough to know the difference between right and wrong." "Huh," said Lady Jean, not too convinced. And as they were speaking of this matter, Chalon and Lady Jean were passing by one of those prison orphanages. And this did not know it at the time, and the place did not look like a prison, and the gates were open. And it had an interesting garden, and the windows were made of stained glass lead. And each window had a different design, and the facade only had 4 large windows, and the first one featured a person fishing, and the right one had a person sailing a boat, and the left window on the second floor had started a depiction of a coral reef, and the second one had a jellyfish surrounded by a school of tiny fishes, and it was the fetish jellyfish window which caught Chalon's attention. And this house had a lot of nautical references because the owner of the prison was a worshipped Erua, the goddess of seawater. Fresh water had its own divinity. So yeah, like there's different water goddesses, if it's salt water or fresh water. They made a difference. The most popular at the moment involves, unlike the cults of Lara, Erua had many different styles of worship. And the most popular at the moment involves sailors wearing makeup. And those inland found this outward expression of worship laughable, and it was no laughing matter to the sailor. And those who stuck to the belief diligently always returned to port in one piece, and those who did not were eventually swallowed by the indifferent ocean. All in all, there was not a centralized type of religious organization, and each little region did its own thing. However, with the waning of the power of Armageddon, the priests were working hard in their region to fill up the power gap, and in this way they hoped to make themselves king priests. And such efforts were still in their infancy, and they bear no relevance to their report. It just seemed like useful background information for my reader to know. And after passing by this orphanage, Chalon stopped before crossing the road, and there was a group of guards marching. And since they did not inspire much confidence, Chalon and Jean turned into the adjacent alley, and from there they stopped to wait for the guards to pass by. And the clouds were slowly gathering, and the alley itself was sandwiched between 2 4-story tall apartment complexes. And since there were older buildings, the alley was slightly thinner than the current regulations allow. Still, it was a bit too much of a hassle to tear down perfectly good buildings to make a bigger alley. And the whole point of this explanation is to illustrate the fact that it was a dark little alley. It was the perfect place to get mugged, as far as I'm concerned. And thankfully the incident at the temple had the guards all in a frenzy, and any self-respecting mugger knew to best lay low. And there was, however, a faint dragging sound, and some uneven footsteps, and as it drew closer, Chalon heard a ragged breath. Something like that. Raggedy breath. And Chalon did his best to ignore the sound, and many a times it was nothing that was pertinent to the physical world he inhabited. And most of the time it was ghosts. He said, "Oh my God, ghost be ghosting me again." The person, or whatever, eventually collapsed, and the guards were finally gone, and Chalon took a step forward, and he was detained by Lady Jean, who was holding on to his elbow. And she did not take a step forward, and turning around, she asked, "Did you hear something?" Lady Jean was not the type of fellow who heard anything remotely supernatural, and since she was little, she had decided to focus on the real world and nothing else, and with enough willpower, one can control perception. And Chalon nodded his head, and at the sound of a familiar voice, the dying man said, "Help me." Chalon finally turned around, and he squinted his eyes a bit, and eventually he saw a huddled figure holding his sides, and he came to sit near the fellow, and he turned the stranger around to have a look at his face, and after gulping some blood, the man said, "Chalon, please don't let me die." Lady Jean drew closer, and she grasped when the light of recognition hit her, and she exclaimed, "By the gods, Jay, what happened to you?" "Help me," repeated Jay, grasping Chalon's shoulder. The blood from his wound stained Chalon's robes, and so while grudgingly Chalon made the attempt to help him. Chalon did not have Visibily's innate healing skills, and all he could do was based on science. So the scientific way of handling the opponent was as so. First, Chalon opened Jay's coat and vest, and using telepathy, he forced the wounds to close shut. He got from beneath his robe some oxygenated water mixed with soap, which he used to clean the 5 stab wounds to the belly. And once the gut was partly clean, he got 5 long pieces of his hair strand, and he kneaded them and then he threaded them with a needle, and then he proceeded to sew up the wounds. And then he applied a bit of ointment over those wounds, and after he was bandaged up using a long, clean white cloth. As for the coughing of blood, Chalon read the mind of Jade's automatic system, and according to it, there was damage in the walls of the stomach as a result of the stab, and the liver was also somewhat compromised. And Chalon sighed, seeing what all his hard work he had led to, and he removed a single piece of golden string from his cloth, and he had it enter the vein, and it eventually made its way to the damaged area, and from there it stood up the gastric walls, and as for the liver, the string turned into a milky substance that sealed up the blood vessels. With these initial repairs, Jay would live quite painfully for the next couple of days, and this was the best he could do with the tools Chalon had available, and with Jay patched out, Chalon carried the larger man in a fashion one usually did with little ladies. And Lady Jean followed behind quite disturbed, and by now Jay was fainted from the pain and blood loss, and she looked quite ghastly indeed with his robes and his face stained with blood. And this was in spite of the fact that he avoided touching Jay as much as possible. And while Chalon walked, people turned to look at him quite alarmed, and a person in a carriage passing by stopped and said, "Do you need a ride?" "Yes, sir, take us back to camp," said Lady Jean alarmed. Chalon did not have means to protest, and Lady Jean was already in the front seat beside the driver, and Chalon placed Jay within and lying flat on the floor on his knee, and Chalon sat on the chair over him and looking down on the fellow, and when all were settled in, the driver raced back to the entrance of society. Time, bro?
11 minutes.
Before the carriage arrived, the merchants were going about their business, and some were rehearsing their little praise, and while others were setting out the portable wooden stage. And it was common for their performances to be done in the exterior of the city, and this did not stop the locals from visiting. And they knew by now what to expect, and in the morning the children had lit the city with posters promoting the performance, and by now the crowd of the locals were roaming the performers' camp, and there was also a couple of local guards here to maintain order. And the jovial piece of everything was shattered by the sound of 2 galloping horses and a carriage speeding out of the city, and one of the guards commented, "Oh, yo, what's all the clamor about?" And they came to see why the man was speeding and why he had run past the checkpoint. And right behind him there was a couple of paladins galloping after the speeding carriage, and the situation became clear when Chalon opened the carriage door, and his face was still splattered in blood, as well as his arms and robes. And the paladins, when they saw the reason for having returned to their post, and Chalon carried Jay in his arms, and word of alarm spread to the camp, and Harold was the first to enter the scene, and he said, "Take him to his mother." The friends rushed and unburdened Chalon, and Harold said, "Come with me, Chalon." And Kay entered the scene, and frowning, she said to Chalon, "What happened?" Harold said, "We are being watched. It is best not to discuss private matters out in the open." "I'm afraid he will not do so," said one of the guards coming forward. "A crime was committed within our fair city. Foreigner or not, this will not do." Time, bro?
10 minutes to go.
So yourself, said Harold, knowing that it was futile to argue with a curious guard. It's not like the guard cared that the foreigners had gotten attacked. He was just curious. He just bored. So he just wants all the details to gossip with his other guard friends. Cause of boredom. As if remembering something, Harold added, "Someone help Lady Jean return to her room." And right on cue, 4 jesters came and helped Lady Jean descend from the carriage, and she was escorted back to her trailer. And as for the guard, he was indeed inquiring out of curiosity and out of duty, and he had no intention of following through with the investigation of an attempted murder of a foreigner. And at most, he would offer his report to the paladins, and that would be the end of the matter. The name of this particular guard was Sir Lamorac, and he was a medium height, about 5'6", and he had short black hair and eyes that changed color based on his emotion, and it was a trait he had inherited from his nymph mother, and his father was some feudal lord or another, and his mother was not certain, and since Lamorac was a handsome youth, two lords had laid claim to him as their legitimate heir, and it was a fancy born out of convenience and out of the fact that his mother had told both fathers that Sir Lamorak was their son, and this in the end does not matter too much in the grand scheme of things. Sure, he had properties under his name, but plain little prince in a castle was not too much of an appeal for Sir Lamorak, and to spend his idle time he decided to get himself a safe little day job as a guard, and at most all he ever had to do was beat up some thieving peasants, and the heavy lifting was usually done by the paladins. The paladins was just a fancy name given to the palace guards, and whenever anything serious was afoot, a small garrison of them would leave the palace, riding on horseback to tackle the problem, and there was usually a pair of them guarding each entrance of the city. And moving along, Chalon followed after Harold with the guard trailing behind him, and eventually they reached Harold's trailer, and Harold entered first and Chalon followed afterward, and before Sir Lamorak could enter, Chalon closed the door behind him, and Lamorak annoyed said, "Hey, you said I could listen in." And Lamorak knocked a couple of times, and in the end he decided not to press the issue. The night was closely approaching, and he was eager to end his shift. And once Harold heard the night depart, he asked Chalon what happened. Chalon grabbed his board to write down, and Harold took the board and shot from Chalon before saying, "I haven't the patience for your nonsense. Use your words and be brief about it." Chalon was silent for a moment, and during that moment he imagined how the rest of the day was supposed to progress, and after returning Lady Jean, he would have eaten his supper, and he would then have performing his night festivities as a big player, but a player nonetheless, and after the scenes he would have gone into the graveyard to awaken some dormant revenants, and depending on the reverend's mood, he might have performed a duo, or done a task or two, and we would have returned home to write a bit before tucking in his dolls for bed. None of the people from the clan made a big deal about the dolls, and each person in the clan had his own eccentricity that were indulged under the rule of Harold the laid back, and the bully culture did not exist in the camp, and any member who tried to burst a person's bubble was severely reprimanded. In the end, since Chalon was not speaking, Harold signed and he returned Chalon's board in shock, and Chalon swiftly wrote, "I was walking back with Lady Jean when I turned around and I see Jay bleeding out on the floor." "Who, you did not see the attacker?" asked Harold. Chalon shook his head in response, and Chalon added, "There was a thief in the temple, he could have attacked Jay." "It is certainly a possibility," said Harold more to himself, "and the city of society only grows more dangerous as its war progresses, and truly only an unscrupulous bastard could have the audacity to rob a bad temple." "Those who do become a curse in this world," wrote Chalon. "Then it should be easy for you to find out who the culprit is," said Harold, smiling. Chalon bashed his palm against his head, and then he mouthed the phrase, "You're right." Getting up, Chalon wrote, "I will track him right away." "Wait," said Harold, detaining Chalon. "Take Kate with you, and she might want to participate in the rites of retribution." Chalon nodded in response, and he left the trailer and made his way to the resting place of Jay, and he assumed that his sister would be with him, and along the way his belly started rumbling, and he made his way to the kitchen area, and since he was short of time, he cooked for himself some ham with cheese on top of it, and the cheese melted and he placed it inside a piece of bread, which was wrapped around a cloth, and with this done he proceeded to walk while eating, and he stopped a moment when he saw Vadim coming towards it, and Vadim was the father of the twins, and he asked Chalon, "Are you well?" Time, bro?
5 minutes, 30 seconds.
It was then when Chalon noticed that he had not bothered to change, and his hands were stained with blood, and he was touching food, and this would be a hygiene problem for someone with low metabolism, and in the end Chalon placed under his robe his ass-eating sandwich, and he wiped the blood from his hand and the side of his robes, and he then wrote to Vadim, "I am fine. You should bathe before heading out, lest you attract unwanted attention, and Kay is waiting for you in the entrance of the city," explained Vadim. Vadim was about 5 years old, and he did not look a day over 25, and the humans in this world aged somewhat slowly than the garden variety humans of other worlds, and so people's lifetimes could be increased with technology. Still, most have kept the traditional aging rate, and these humans lived a bit longer than usual as a result of their diet, and there was an interesting bacteria on the soils, and when consumed by the locals, it slowed down the aging process, and those who ate more veggies tended to age a lot slower, and this is at least what the local grandmothers used to say to their children. Anyhow, Vadim had a tiny colored skin and mint colored eyes, and he sported a beard because he thought it made him look younger. And his wife's Labby thought him silly, but she was not one to argue, and she detested any type of conflict, be they small or major. and at the moment she was petting Jay's head, and she used to do so ever since he was a wee child, and it would comfort him whenever he was not well. And Labby was of a fairy complexion, though it did not matter too much since she spent a lot of time outdoors, and as such she had a tan complexion and her eyes were the color of amber, and she was 7 years older than Baleen. Before taking his bath, Chalon peered through the window of Kate's trailer, and Labby looked up and she said, "He's fine." Chalon stepped back a bit and he noticed the two other maidens coming with cloths and a wash basin, and it was important to keep the wounds clean to aid the slow recuperation progress. And from the trailer, Chalon went towards the well and he removed his clothing, and then he pressed them into his somewhat closed fists in the same fashion employed by magicians in their silly handkerchief tricks, and he proceeded to scrub himself clean with soap and sponge. And every so often he would draw water from the well to clean himself, and when he felt he was partly clean, he summoned forth a new set of attires. Time, Bob?
2 minutes, 30 seconds.
Since the night felt heavy, he decided to sport something a little lighter, and his new matrix came in 2 pieces. The hood and sleeves were made of chiffon, and the ends of the sleeve were all embroidered, and the hood was also chiffon. The chest piece was made of charmeuse, and it only went as low as the chest, leaving the belly button exposed, and the skirt was tied by a thick leather belt, and it was made of chiffon with embroidered patterns, and below it he wore short pants that were knee-long, and for shoes he wore leather boots decorated with laces, and on the hands he had a small leather gloves with fingers open, and the entire collar scheme was black, and to break the monotony he had gold on the belt and ruby on the bow of laces, and large hoop earrings. And after looking at his over-the-top, Chalon reached into his sleeve and he brought out an ornamental rapier with golden leaves, and with this he felt himself dressed enough for the real world. And by now night had finally fallen, and there was a little bit of a red glow left in the night sky, and the stars were out and the moon was shining rather brightly, and Chalon ran swiftly till he made it to the outskirts of the city, and there was Kay. She was dressed like a male nobleman with a lace hat and a pretty collar with the dress sword, and still the overall color scheme was pink and white, and she was not visibly hot inside that outfit. Still the laws of decency prevented most people from dressing based on their temperature that surrounded them. And when she saw Sarah Chalon, she commented, "Are you not a little underdressed?" "Meh," wrote Chalon. "Suit yourself. It won't be my fault if we get fined by the guards," said Kay sternly. And the pair walked towards the town, and the magistrate was the same one from the afternoon, and when he recognized Kay and Chalon, he allowed them to pass without any inquiry. And once inside, Kay asked, "Where do we start our search?" Alright, let's leave it here. Bye-bye and God bless.